Hello, welcome back to my channel. I'm Jackie and LBJ, and we started reading a book about the Kennedys this summer, and we have now finished that book. If you missed it, you can go back and catch that entire playlist of episodes going through Maureen Callahan's book, Ask Not, the Kennedys and the Women They Destroyed. It was fantastic, and the best thing that we all liked about it was just getting a quick succession of all of the different Kennedy stories, or at least a smattering of them. We didn't get all, but we got a good look at the kinds of stories that plagued, haunted, influenced the lives of the Kennedys and the people who were Kennedy adjacent. In that book, I began occasionally, the first one I found was the Chappaquiddick Life magazine, and that one was fantastic. And then over the course of the book, I just came to find, I went to my local antique stores and found different Life magazines. And recently I found a box on the ground near the exit door. I hadn't found anything that day. All I had found was plants. And I said, what is this box? And she said, oh, that's all free. And on the top was a National Enquirer, but as I looked further down, there were actually 7 Kennedy related Life magazines and Look magazines. And so we're going to be starting a series going through these JFK assassination related Life magazines. And this one today is the one immediately following his assassination. You might remember, and in fact, I'll link to it in the show notes, we have looked at the one that's a week after this, which is covering the JFK funeral. But this one is the one that's just processing his actual assassination. And so we're going to open it today. I have not opened it. Like you guys know, I get them, and if they are already in plastic, I do not open them, but this one was not, but I now have these plastic sheets. So I went ahead and did that, and I have not looked at it. So it also obviously is missing the cover. I'll put up a picture of what it would have looked like with the cover. That's what the cover actually looks like. It does have this on the back page, which is a picture of Jackie and Caroline and Jack at the beach. But we're going to open it up and start reading together. Editor's note at the top says, "The President's Empty Chair." And I'll read you the highlights from that. It says, "Seeing the President was, under Jack Kennedy, a relaxed visit. You might have had to wait around for a while in the anteroom or in his secretary's office. She was a friendly, middle-aged lady with rimless spectacles. But eventually you were invited in. When this happened, you got up from a simple, straight-backed chair with a black cushioned seat and walked into the Oval Office. Immediately you were conscious of the blue rug, the desk with light streaming in." He describes the room. "The President's handshake was neither too hard nor too soft. It was gracious. He sat in the rocking chair and you sat on the sofa looking at him from the side. He was carefully but somewhat informally dressed, trousers sharply pressed and well-worn shoes well-shined. His face had an everlasting tan, and he looked at you with a head slightly cocked back and gray eyes glinting at you with an expression that combined interest, amusement, and mischief. President Kennedy was fascinated by the press. He played it, quite frankly, to enhance himself and his administration. He read avidly and quickly and had a journalist's antenna out for the public pulse. So it was natural for him to ask me right away about Life's Nielsen rating. I didn't have the vaguest idea what it was, but he did, to the finest percentage point." He goes on and tells a few stories. He says, "All of us are sad that he is dead. I am particularly sad. I liked him as a man. He was a fine president. It is hard for me to forget one slight incident, one that revealed to me the guts he had. I knew, as we all did, that his back hurt, but I didn't realize how much until he took me over to a corner of his outer office to show me a hunting rifle he was going to present to a visiting head of state. It was in a brown cardboard carton standing in the corner. Bending over slightly, the president took apart the side of the carton and sidled the weapon out, holding the muzzle and sliding the butt across the floor. It weighed 9 pounds, he said, but he couldn't even lift it. He asked me to help him, and I did." George P. Hunt, managing editor. So that's the introduction to this magazine. The next one is an editorial that says, an intelligent, courageous presidency. We'll read a bit of this one. Next to the incredulous shock and sorrow, perhaps the commonest emotion after President Kennedy's assassination was fury. It was the kind of helpless fury rational people feel at an irrational act. As Theodore Roosevelt wrote about the last assassination of a president, that of McKinley, quote, it was in the most naked way an assault, not on power, not on wealth, but simply and solely upon free government, government by the common people, because it was government and because it yet stood for order as well as for liberty. The American system has survived previous assassinations, 3 in a century, and will survive this one. These crimes disfigure our history, bloody reminders of the warped evil that can strike at even the stablest and freest of human societies. Assassination cannot undermine the Republic, though it can martyr a leader. The crime of November 22nd, 1963, removed from the White House one of the most intelligent and attractive of our 35 presidents, John F. Kennedy, to whom may God give rest. He talks about the love that people had for him, the way that people talked about his intellectual aura, that the Russians honored this man and trusted him like no American before, that the world changed fast in Kennedy's 3 years, that he, even though whether or not he was in control, that he was never put off balance by them. And his courage in the Cuban Missile Showdown may have changed the history of the world. Indeed. This is one of the things that I think is important for us on the heels of the book Ask Not, because certainly Maureen Callahan did not pull any punches in regard to JFK. And I don't fault her for that. I think we need to have a non-rose-colored glass lens look at this particular president. But I do think it is important that we also have to put his historical significance alongside his sexual misbehavior, because they are both true. His wisdom in navigating the Cuban Missile Crisis to keep back-channel connections with Khrushchev is significant. He was a wise man in statecraft, and it's important that we don't erase the one to honor the other. It's okay to say both, and we should acknowledge both. We should be truth tellers who can handle and tell the truth about his sexual, not just misbehavior, but in some ways borderline criminal, certainly him drugging a woman, and potentially sexual aggression against her. You know, we need to acknowledge that, tell the truth about it. It was more than just, oh, he was a womanizer. It was beyond that. There was some really unhealthy, unstable interactions with women that were constant throughout seemingly his adult life. At the same time, this is true. He was intelligent. He was a good leader. Let's keep reading. Talks about Lyndon Johnson. I'm just going to skip over that part. Not that it's insignificant, but I do want to kind of keep the focus on JFK. There are some Christmas advertisements, which is interesting. You don't think about the JFK assassination happening right smack around our holiday season. What an odd and difficult reality that would have been during that holiday season. So the first photo we're given is the President and Mrs. Kennedy arriving at Love Field. She has her bright red roses, and this, you know, so much of the coverage was covered in black and white, but this photo really shows the color of her wool outfit. And it was some people tried to call it raspberry ice cream. I've heard it called pink. It does seem more raspberry than just a plain pink. What would you call it? It's not carnation pink. It's a lovely color though. She had, of course, a great eye for fashion, and then her pillbox hat. But there she is with her gloves, and everybody was so thrilled. There's a man here in Dallas who does the introduction for JFK lectures, and he was a boy who was there that day, and he talks about the thing that he remembers most is the excitement of the crowd. That, of course, he was a boy, and so he doesn't he has a few distinct memories, but the sense of just utter enthusiasm is what he recalls from that day. This says the assassination of President Kennedy. And I'm assuming this is a cleaned up look at the seat, because you'll notice there is no blood, there's no brains. So I would be interested to know when this photo was taken, but there's the seat with the roses in disarray. It says, now in the sunny freshness of a Texas morning with roses in her arms and a luminous smile on her lips, Jacqueline Kennedy still had 1 hour to share the buoyant surge of life with the man at her side. What a sad thought. It was a wonderful hour, vibrant with confidence, crinkle-eyed, with an all-embracing smile. John F. Kennedy swept his wife with him into the exuberance of the throng at Dallas's Love Field. This was an act in which Jack Kennedy was superbly human. Responding to the warmth his own genuine warmth evoked in others, he met his welcomers joyously, hand to hand and heart to heart. For him, this was all fun as well as politics. For his shy wife, surmounting the grief of her infant son's recent death, this mingling demanded a grace and gallantry she soon would need again. Then the cavalcade, fragrantly laden with roses for everyone, started into town. 8 miles on the way, in a 6th floor window, the assassin waited. So there's already a narrative here. Perhaps that's what happened. You guys may know that, I hold my questions about that, but we haven't gotten there yet. We'll see. All the roses, like those here abandoned in Vice President. This is Vice President Johnson's car. That makes more sense as to why that is so clean. It's because it's not the president's car. It's the one that was behind them. Roses were left to wilt. They would long be faded before a stunned nation would fully comprehend its sorrow. And here we have the exclusive series of pictures that now we know as the Zapruder film. But Life magazine contracted with Mr. Zapruder, is my understanding, like the day of or in the 24 hours following the assassination, that I believe Mr. Zapruder took it to a development place, or maybe the Secret Servicemen accompanied him. I don't quite remember those details, but he took them, and in the process of that, Life was calling and there was negotiations, and soon Life got exclusive rights to share these photos. Remember, it is a series of still photographs in the Zapruder film. And so what they did was they gave us almost all of the photos, but withheld, I believe, 2 or 3 frames that actually show the headshot that ended up obviously being the one that took his life. Perhaps he could have sustained the other one that came, but in these photos, we'll just go photo by photo. We have the motorcycle man coming in the front and so on. And then as he emerges from behind the sign, so all of the ones here, he's obscured from view. As he emerges from behind the sign, this is the one where you can see him grabbing his throat. His arms are up in this sort of position. He's raised and hunched, and Mrs. Kennedy is noticing him. So you can see her head is turned toward him, and he has his hand up at his throat. And then she's reaching. Then his arms come up into a full, like 90-degree T shape. You see here in this photo, his elbows are out. She is fully noticing. And he's up, up, up. He's leaning on her down in this shot. You can see it's printed rather large. He's leaning on her. He leans down to the side, and he's in her lap. And so what this series removes is the ones where his head goes back and there's a cloud, the pink cloud of his blood that's from this direction. So those initial pictures certainly colored the public's view. And that's why if you want to go and watch that original, it was Geraldo Rivera who showed the Zapruder film for the very first time in American history on American television stations. And when he did, there's this audible gasp from everyone in the room because they had not seen the middle part of these pictures, which is the headshot, where his head obviously goes back. The plume of bloody smoke or bloody mass comes out, is visible in one of the frames. And so these pictures certainly tell a different story of he's shot, he comes up, and then he just slumps. And it omits the part where the headshot happened. So that's fascinating. And I think their story was that they did that to protect his dignity, to preserve the violence of the action from being shown to the American public. But because they got the exclusive rights for it, that did contribute to a misunderstanding on the part of the American people. Now we have him slumped there at the top, and then we have Jackie climbing up on top before she's met here with Clint Hill. She is fully on top, and there's Clint Hill. When she saw these photos, she later said she didn't know what she was doing. These are captioned, "Oh no, Mrs. Kennedy cries as she sees the blood flowing from the president's head, but the convoy keeps going past the onlookers and photographers who stand frozen or fall to the ground as they hear the shots." Yes, in some of these you can see people already falling to the ground. They're already aware. As the president lies dying, Jackie scrambles out of her seat and crawls onto the trunk of the car in a pathetic search for help. As she crouches on her hands and knees, the president's head presses against her, staining her skirt and stockings with blood. A Secret Service man leaps on the bumper to protect the First Lady and get her back into the car. The fact was that she was holding a piece of his brain matter in her hand clear the rest of this trip, even into Parkland Hospital. And while Jack was being worked on in Trauma Room 1, she walked up to a doctor and said, "Here," and was holding a piece of his gray brain matter in her hands. So the thought is that she actually had gone back to reach for a piece of his skull. Here we have a picture of people's shock and prayers. It says, before a Pietà in St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York and in churches everywhere, people fall to their knees and, seeking some solace, pray for the dead president. We have Lyndon Johnson taking the oath of office with Jackie beside him, and you'll remember she did not change her clothes. She said, "Let them see what they've done." And she wanted to stay in that lovely raspberry outfit with the blood stains on it. She's just in utter shock there. You can't even imagine all of the shock and grief and disbelief she must have been in that moment. And then here we have LBJ and Lady Bird. It talks about him taking the oath of office, that her husband's casket was on board. Here we have a close-up of Jackie and RFK meet the plane as she deplaned. Here is Air Force One with the casket going down to a hearse. It says she said goodbye with a kiss and a ring. Remember, she kissed him and then exchanged their rings. And it says Jacqueline Kennedy was sitting beside her husband when he was shot. She held him in her arms in the desperate dash to the hospital. She was with him when they put his body in the casket in Dallas, and there she said farewell with a kiss and slipped the wedding band from her own finger onto his. Her hand lightly touched the casket as it was carried to an ambulance in Dallas, and she refused to leave it even long enough to alight from the presidential plane in Washington by the passenger ramp Instead, she stayed with it on the cargo lift, which lowered the casket to the ground, and then she jumped down herself. They actually show that here, that she was in the cargo lift and decided to jump down rather than leave his body to go down the steps. Isn't that fascinating? Hand in hand with Attorney General Robert Kennedy, she rode with it to Bethesda Naval Hospital and then back at last to the White House. Never in that long, long afternoon and night did she leave him, even to change the blood-stained suit she wore away from Dallas. It talks about the military honor guard that accompanied his body. It says, no bugler sounded taps, no drum beat its ruffle, no band pealed hail to the chief as John F. Kennedy, 35th President of the United States, returned for the last time to Washington, the city where he practiced the magic art of leadership. It was 17 years ago he came here from Boston, and in the years since, his arrivals and departures came to punctuate the telling of American history. But he came this time in silence. The faint shrill of distant jets, the sputter and cough of belly-lighted helicopters carried the men of power from Washington to the field. It was moist and chilly, and the twilight bars of pink had just given way to a quarter moon hung with mists when Air Force No. 1, the presidential jet, silently rolled up the runway from the south. The pilot in the cockpit must have sensed the hush. So skillfully had he stilled the motors, so surprisingly did the plane appear in the total glare of the lights and soundlessly come to a stop. It was 6:03 p.m. One wished for a cry, a sob, a wail, any human sound. But the plane with its long blue flashings rested under the punishment of the light, sealed and silent. We have the cabinet, grieving people in Amsterdam and in France. It says, death found him from this window, and we have the window casing around the photo. And then here you can see the motorcade route. The arrow is where the fatal shot would have happened. And there's the underpass, the famous triple underpass that they hurried out of, and then they would have gone this way up the ramp out to Parkland. It says, from this grimy warehouse window ledge of the Texas School Book Depository, the assassin shot President Kennedy. Stacked book cartons, one of which still lies at right in the foreground. So here, that's that shadowy box there. Afforded him makeshift privacy, but he perilously risked exposure by any passerby. Yes, you can see this building. What you don't really see in the video, you see it after they've already turned onto this way. But when somebody is approaching the Texas School Book Depository, they almost came directly at it and then had to turn very quickly. And there's this area over here where all of the onlookers could have looked up and immediately see them, and some claimed to have done that. Some had pointed out the window and they had assumed maybe there was a sharpshooter protecting the president from that window. So it describes the window. It talks about the police finding 3 spent cartridges and 1 unused. It says they found the weapon, a beat-up, sawed-off 30 caliber rifle of Italian make, fitted with a 4-power telescopic sight. Well, here's a little levity. We have a 64 Chevrolet in lime green here in this magazine. The assassin, we get the close-up photo of Jack Ruby going for Lee Harvey Oswald because, of course, at this point, that had also happened. And so here we have that. We have details of Lee Harvey Oswald, a discussion of his mother, the teasing and description of him as a loner is already here. We have his history. from Russian pamphlets and high school interest in Karl Marx. We have a picture of him 90 minutes after the president was shot, looking up at the camera. We have a picture of his mother, Marguerite, looking, of course, very sad. How else would she look? We have these August 1963 photos of Oswald passing out pro-Castro leaflets. Now, oh, and we have his wife here, Marina, with the baby. Baby Rachel. Rachel had been born 6 weeks before in Parkland Hospital, where Kennedy had died. So that's very sad. It says she's waiting numbly. Something interesting about this 1963 August photo of him passing out pro-Castro leaflets. This presents a mystery, this whole pro-Castro element of his life, where he just whisks off and has plenty of money to go to places that are pretty unexplainable for a poor guy who had just defected from Russia. We have questions about Oswald. Back to Kennedy. It's interesting the ways that, like, there was a book review and there's this woman who's being featured for her hand making of fiddles and cellos. And what's shocking is, surely that's not what people were reading in this magazine. They're not looking for information about handmade fiddles at this particular moment. All right, Lyndon Johnson, we have a profile on him. Here they are at the DNC in 1960. We have Kennedy and Johnson together there. And then we have a little profile on Lyndon Johnson, which again, I'm not going to focus on that. We have Lyndon Johnson's life, the baby boy born to be a senator. So we have lots and lots and lots of photos of him to kind of introduce America to the new president. Oh, interesting. We have an article about angry U.S. Negroes. And the article is called Power Structure, Integration, Militancy, Freedom, Now. Well, that's very interesting. And it's written by the same premier headliner that wrote the initial article we read about Kennedy, Theodore White. That might be one to come back and look at if we get into race relations on this channel. These pages are very brittle. At the end, we have the warmest way to remember him. And I will just hold up this photo while we read. It says, it was along the shores of a Cape Cod resort, Hyannisport, that Jack Kennedy found relief from the cares of his office and had the time really to be a father. He loved to sail, swim, and ramble with his family. The intimate photographs on these 4 pages show the part of his life the president kept for himself and his loved ones. Photographer Mark Shaw recorded it for all who loved him. So we have this. And we just get this one. We must be missing 2 pages. This is the final photograph that we have. I actually have a book, the book that Mark Shaw put together of all of the intimate family photos he had from Hyannisport. So we'll go through that sometime together on this channel just to look at their family photos. But that is the November 29th, 1963 Life magazine. I hope you've enjoyed it. It definitely gave us a picture of the awe that people had of President Kennedy, the grace that Jackie had under fire to never leave the side of his body. And of course, the next Life magazine, which if you have not looked at it, I will put it in the show notes, but the one that's the very next week, December 6th, I believe, December 5th, 1963, that showed her the way she was able to marry pageantry and quiet humility in his funeral plans. So she definitely showed her grace and skill in these days, but also the shock of the nation, and then those photos from the Zapruder film, the still images, which were the first for America to become acquainted with what had happened in Dallas. So this is this magazine. I hope you'll come back and join me for future Life magazines. We also have, I'm just going to give you a very quick preview of what we have. We have this whole stack. We have President Johnson at his White House desk. So we may or may not get to anything in there. If it has to do with Kennedy's, we'll focus on it. This one is 4 years later. It's Governor Connolly's look at why Kennedy even went to Texas. And so it has unpublished photos of that trip. Then this was interesting. So this is Look magazine, and it has a 3-part examination by a man named William Manchester called The Death of a President. And it comes to us in 3 different parts. So that's the first one, then we have the second one, and then the third one of his telling of the assassination. And not only that, but apparently this is the only one that Jackie asked to be done. So he took 2 years to do this research, and this was his 3-part conclusion to over 1,000 interviews that he did about that day. Fascinating stuff. And then we have a McCall's look at Jackie's White House years. So we'll look at that. And we have, this is right after the Robert F. Kennedy assassination. This one also is missing the cover, but I was shocked. I did a very quick peek through of this one. The photos are wonderful. It actually gives a huge amount of Kennedy history in these pages. So we're gonna go through these magazines. I hope that gave you a little taste of some of the things that we're gonna get to look at. These are just each gonna be one episode coming in the next few months. So I hope you'll join me for these. Please subscribe if you haven't, and have a great day. Bye-bye.